Hi everyone, it's me, Tim. Today I want to talk about localized damage systems. What do I mean by that? Comes from a question from viewer Cain and Abel. Okay, putting Cain in there gives you one eyebrow raise, but the fact that you spelled Abel, A-I-B-E-L, gives you both eyebrows raised. Anyway, Cain and Abel asked, can you do a video on the pros and cons of localized damage, like body parts have their own health pool, and if, for instance, your leg is too injured, you can't run or have a hard time walking? First of all, I chose this because this is a really fun topic to talk about. It just opens up so many things when you're talking about something so basic in a role-playing game, and I'm going to talk about it in the context of a role-playing game. Something so basic as getting damaged. And I want to tell you, localized damage is way more than just talking about aim shots and crippling and stuff like that. In fact, it's more than even having localized health pools. Because before I even talk about that, let's talk about hit points for a second. Hit points are great. They've been around literally for decades. I want to say 50, 60 years. They're great because they're an abstraction of generalized damage that is very easy to understand and implement, to do the damage, to have healing, and to increase the maximum of. All those things about hit points are very easy to understand, and anyone has seen that in a billion games, not just role-playing games. You've seen it in everything. It's been around so much, it's pretty much just a standard. It's as close to a standard as we can get in any RPG or any game. In fact, here's how standardized it is. You may have a game when it first starts explain like the hit point bar, like just tell you where it is and that it may fade away when it's at full, but it doesn't actually explain the hit points. It may go, yeah, this is when you take damage. The same way that you may play a game that got sword fighting in it, and it will explain the controls to use the sword, but none of them ever explain what a sword is. It doesn't go, well, this is the hilt part and this is the guard part, and it's got a blade, and sometimes the blade is sharper on one side, but sometimes it's sharper on two sides. Then they don't do that, because guess what? You know what a sword is. This is what's interesting to me about hit points, because they're so fundamental that to talk about localized damage, we got to talk about hit points. I will do a little sidebar. Hit points do make other damage systems more complicated and a little harder to make, a little harder to explain, because let's say you want to implement exhaustion from running or sprinting or using power attacks, or you want to introduce poison damage or radiation damage if you're making a post-apocalyptic game. I heard some of you like those. To do these kind of systems, you need to do one of two things. Either they have their own bar. This is my poison level. This is my exhaustion level. This is my radiation level. Or they somehow interact with your hit point bar. Some games, the more radiation you take, it lowers your health bar. It fills up from the other side with the radiation damage. This is great, but this introduces questions about how simple is this hit point system now? What parts of it do I now have to explain? If I get healed while poisoned or irradiated, does it take care of the poison or the radiation, or does it just heal me back up to where that other bar grew down and then it stops? If I level up when I'm poisoned or irradiated, and my maximum goes up, will it shift over? And when it shifts over, do I have the health that's in the spot that's now empty? These are all questions you have to ask as a designer and decide and somehow convey this to the player. So my point of this is even very simple things like having one hit point pool, it's got some complications. So now let's talk, finally, after 4.5 minutes, let's talk about localized damage. You can do localized damage, as the questioner asked, Cain and Abel, with various hit pools. And therefore you can have, I get hit in the arm, my arm hit points go down. That way you can have a head pull, a torso pull, a pull on each arm, a pull on each leg. You can even have more than that if you want. Great. This immediately gives you more damage results and a lot more options on how to do damage protection. because it introduces aim shots. Obviously, there's going to be aim shots. Even if you don't have player aiming, when the player shoots at something, it's still got to decide where it hit and then apply those effects. But once you've got those locations, you're probably going to let the player aim, either in real time aim. We did that in Outer Worlds, or they have called shots. They can decide a spot to aim at and pick that, which we did in Fallout. Once you have damage by location, you can now do damage effects based on location. And you all have seen these. If you have a crippled arm, if it's your main arm, it reduces your single and two-handed weapons. It'll reduce a lot of your skills. Maybe you don't lockpick as well. If you cripple your offhand, this will affect your shield skill, your two-handed weapons. If you cripple a leg, maybe your movement goes down. You can't jump as high. Maybe you can't carry as much. You can put all these things into effects of doing damage by location. Now, those would be done by status effects and don't have to be done by a health pool. And I'll talk about that in a second. But you can have it be that if you have a health pool in each area, you can make it so when the health pool goes down, these effects start to take place. You can also, but you may also just have separate effects. Like these effects are applied separately, and when you run out of all your health, that's yet another effect. Once you have this damage by location, suddenly you can make armor by location. You just don't have to have a monolithic, I'm wearing plate, I'm wearing chain. You can say, well, I have a helmet on, and I have these kind of, I always think greaves are on your pants. I have these kind of greaves, I have these arm guards, I have this chainmail shirt. You can start having interesting different parts, different kinds of stuff on different parts of your body. Location armor is cool because not only for combat and for taking damage, you can introduce a lot of localized non-combat effects. Like certain boots make you walk more quietly. Armor can do that too. Armor can be noisy when you move, but really focusing on the boots and saying I'm wearing soft-soled boots, they don't have as high of a damage reduction, but I move really stealthily, gives players a lot more choices and based on their character build. You could do things like if you're wearing a helmet, that gives a lot of protection because it only has these little islets here. Great. The higher protection helmets reduce perception. People understand it and get it, and you can start introducing these. Once you have all that, you can also have perks that reduce, or I would call it ameliorate, some of these negative effects. So maybe you can wear noisier armor, but you're better at padding it, so it's quieter. Or maybe you're so used to wearing a helmet with slits that you're used to moving your head back and forth, so you don't take as big a perception penalty. Perks can be written any way you want, but once you have all these things that can happen to the player, suddenly it opens up your perk pool for how you can ameliorate it, and people can have a build that makes certain player builds better or more balanced to play. Well, guess what? Guess what I just did? I just described a system that's way more complicated. It's not only more complicated for the designer to write and make sure they get all the edge cases, but now your programmers have a way more complicated system to make, and your UI is going to be more complicated. Once you have more complication, it's that much harder to understand. And by the way, quick little side note, this is why you see less innovation in games. And it's not just because companies are not willing to take as much risk, which is one of the main reasons. But another reason is, once you innovate something, you lose some of the audience members. They just go away. They're like, I've never seen anything like this, I don't get it, I don't feel like learning it, and they're gone. Now, I have said in the past that every time you make a design decision, you bifurcate the gaming group. If you decide to be turn-based rather than real-time, if you decide to be isometric rather than first-person, there are a few people out there that go, I will not play this game based on that decision. I'm just saying, whenever you make a simple system more complicated, you will lose people. Now, you may gain some people who were bored by those simple systems. Will they balance? I don't know. Do you know? It's a risk. That's why it's called a risk. Anyway, this is one of those things. If you replace hit points, just one hit point bar, with a more complicated system of different location damages, new players will have a bigger learning curve to figure out your game. Yet there's more armor to wear, which means there's more for them to keep track of, more drops of different types, that they either have to decide whether that would be good for them or whether they want to sell them. If armor can get damaged, now you have more to keep track of for repair. I mean, what does it mean when you go into a combat and your greaves are really damaged, but your torso's fine? Are you good? Are you not? You have to play it and figure out how much of the game depends on that and how many enemies tend to aim. Then there's other experiences that all players, experienced or not, will wonder, how does this location-based damage work for something like an AoE attack? Like if I get hit with a fireball, first of all, what armor is being damaged? Or maybe it's all of it. Is it all of it the full amount of the fireball? Does it get does it get, percentage an effect over all the armor? So if you get hit with a fireball, is half the damage going to your torso armor and maybe 10% to each limb? You have to decide that, and then you have to let the player know. Similarly, if something attacks the player with an unaimed shot, does it automatically go to the torso? Or is it somewhere at random? And what are those random percentages? That needs to be conveyed. How do aim shots work on a non-humanoid entity? What if you have, a dragon? A dragon has 4 legs and 2 wings. Or maybe you could say 2 legs, 2 arms, and wings. What if it's an ooze, which may have no locations whatsoever? How do you do that? How do you aim at some of these non-humanoid entities? How does healing work? And I'm talking whether it's from like an item, like a potion, or a healing spell, or just time. I go rest. What pools get healed first? What effects come off? What effects can't come off and they need something particular to get them removed? How are you going to decide to do this? And how are you going to make sure you convey that to the player so they understand what's happening and they're not just frustrated of why I'm always moving really slow and I don't know why. I've sold all my inventory. I don't know why I'm moving so slow. Oh, I forgot my legs were crippled. And again, if you don't have to do multiple pulls, you can do 1 health pull for everything and you just get status effects when they're applied to various parts of the body. But you can still make the damage come from 1 overall pull. Because if you do multiple pulls, how does that work? Remember I talked about how does an exhaustion system work? How does poison work? How does radiation work? How does that work now if you have lots of pulls? If you have various pulls? If I take radiation, is it spread over my whole body? If I take poison, is it just on the location that got the poison damage? You got to decide. You can make an argument either way, especially for that poison one. It might just be in the limb that got poisoned, might be the whole body. You got to decide, and then you have to make sure the players understand your decision. If you go with 1 health pool, you can still, like I said, have 1 monolithic health pool, but then have, various parts of your body with different armor that can be aimed at and cripple effects that go on the body and pull damage from 1 pull. That will still make sense. One thing you need to realize, though, is not all of the status effects you make will make sense for every type of enemy you have. You can cripple, a wolf by shooting it in the leg. But is crippling a quadruped in 1 leg as bad as crippling a biped in 1 leg? I don't know. You're going to have to decide that. What about a ghost? Can you cripple a ghost? So maybe ghosts are immune to certain effects? The same way they can be immune to damage types, some monsters may be immune to damage effects. You got to decide that, and again, figure out some way of explaining that to the player that makes sense and makes enough sense that when they play the game, they got it. They understand this. All of these things raise issues of potentially confusing players and driving away players. So this is what I love about just this simple question of, hey, what about aim shots? We had to talk about hit points. We had to talk about status effects. We had to talk about why innovation may drive away players. So to sum up this entire talk, hit points are very easy to understand, very easy to implement. It's the most ultra simple damage system you can make, and has a very simple corresponding armor system. If you do localized damage, there's a bunch of different ways you can make it, like I've talked about. Some are harder to make. Some are harder to understand for the player. but they open up a lot more interesting damage and armor systems for you to have fun with. And as long as the players have fun with them too, you've made a good system. So, Cain and Abel. I hope this answered your question.